Before we begin, this true story will transform your perspective on faith through suffering. If you want more powerful testimonies like this, subscribe now and hit the bell. It only takes 2 seconds and helps us bring hope to more hearts. Let's begin. Miracle. Gospel artist's kids died while she was performing. How she found her voice again will amaze you. In the heart of Nashville, Tennessee, where country music legends were born and dreams came alive on every street corner, Grace Williams Thompson had built a life that seemed blessed beyond measure. At 32 years old, she was one of Christian music's most beloved voices, with 3 platinum albums and a voice that could make angels weep. Her modest but comfortable home on Maple Street was filled with the laughter of her 3 precious children, 6-year-old twins, Emma and Lily, who sang along to every one of Mommy's songs, and 2-year-old Noah, whose giggling could light up the darkest room in the house. 2 years had passed since losing her husband David in a car accident, but Grace had found strength in her faith and purpose in raising their beautiful children alone. "Mommy, will you sing us the angel song?" Emma would ask every night, referring to Grace's hit single, Heaven's Embrace, that had touched millions of hearts worldwide. The twins had inherited their mother's musical gifts, often harmonizing perfectly together, while little Noah clapped his chubby hands in delight, creating their own family choir in the living room. Every morning, Grace would wake up at 5 a.m. to spend time in prayer and worship before the children stirred. Her home studio, converted from David's old office, had become her sanctuary, where she wrote songs that ministered to broken hearts around the globe. "Lord, use my voice to bring healing," she prayed daily, never imagining how prophetic those words would become. The walls were covered with gold records and photos of her performing at major Christian festivals, but her greatest treasures were the crayon drawings her children made of Mommy singing to Jesus. That particular October morning felt different somehow. Grace was preparing for the biggest concert of her career at the legendary Grand Ole Opry, a dream venue where she would debut her new song, Faithful Through the Storm. As she made pancakes shaped like hearts for the twins and cut Noah's fruit into tiny pieces, she felt an unusual heaviness in her spirit that she couldn't quite explain. "Mommy, why do you look sad?" Lily asked with the intuitive wisdom that children possess. "Just nervous about tonight's concert, sweetheart," Grace replied, forcing a smile while an unexplainable dread settled deep in her chest. Little did she know that this would be the last morning she would ever make breakfast for her beloved children, and that by evening her world would be shattered beyond recognition. The Grand Ole Opry was sold out that evening, with 4,400 devoted fans filling every seat to hear Grace Williams Thompson's highly anticipated performance. Backstage, Grace sat in her dressing room, applying the final touches of makeup, while video calling her children one last time before the show. "We love you, Mommy. Sing loud so Jesus can hear you," the twins chorused through the phone screen, while Noah babbled, "Mama, Mama," and blew kisses at the camera. Mrs. Henderson, their trusted babysitter of 2 years, waved from behind them. "Don't worry about a thing, Grace. We're going to have a wonderful evening together," she assured her with the warm smile that had given Grace peace of mind countless times before. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome 3-time Grammy nominee Grace Williams Thompson." The announcer's voice boomed through the historic venue as Grace walked onto the stage that had hosted legends like Dolly Parton and Johnny Cash. The spotlight hit her face, and she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline mixed with divine purpose. Wearing a flowing white dress that seemed to glow under the stage lights, she looked like an angel herself as she approached the microphone with her signature gentle smile. "Good evening, Nashville. Tonight, I want to share a new song that God placed on my heart during my darkest season." Grace spoke into the microphone, her voice carrying the warmth and sincerity that had endeared her to millions. It's called Faithful Through the Storm, and it's for everyone who's walking through difficult times, wondering if God still sees them. The audience leaned forward in anticipation, phones recording what they expected to be another life-changing performance from their beloved worship leader. As the opening piano chords filled the sacred space of the Opry, Grace closed her eyes and began to sing with the passion that had made her famous. When the winds are howling and the rain won't cease, when my heart is breaking and I can't find peace, you remain faithful, faithful through the storm. Her voice soared through the rafters, every note perfectly pitched, every word delivered with conviction that came from real experience of God's faithfulness through trials. But at exactly 8:47 p.m., while Grace was singing the chorus about God's unwavering love, her phone began buzzing insistently in her purse backstage. The call went to voicemail. Then another call, and another. Mrs. Henderson's panicked voice filled the silence. "Grace, please call me immediately. There's been a terrible accident. The house, there was a fire. I'm so sorry, honey, I'm so sorry." At that very moment, while Grace sang about God's faithfulness, her 3 beautiful children were taking their last breaths, and she had no idea that her world was about to end forever. Grace finished her performance to thunderous applause, completely unaware that her life had just been destroyed while she sang about God's faithfulness. The audience gave her a standing ovation as she took her final bow, tears of joy streaming down her face from what she believed was the spiritual impact of her new song. "Thank you, Nashville. God bless you all," she called out, waving to the crowd with a radiant smile that had become her trademark. Little did she know these would be the last words of praise she would speak for months to come. Backstage, her manager Tony Rodriguez waited with a pale, stricken expression that immediately sent alarm bells through Grace's entire being. "Grace, we need to talk privately. Right now," he said with a gravity in his voice that she had never heard before. His hands were shaking as he led her to a quiet corner away from the celebrating crew members and photographers who wanted to capture her post-performance glow. "What's wrong, Tony? You look like you've seen a ghost." Grace laughed nervously, still high from the successful concert. "Grace, honey, you need to sit down." Tony's voice cracked as he gently guided her to a folding chair. "There's been an accident at your house, a fire. Mrs. Henderson called frantically during your performance." The words hit Grace like physical blows, each syllable stripping away another layer of the joy she had felt just moments before. "What kind of accident? Are the kids okay? Please tell me the kids are okay." Her voice rose to a desperate pitch that echoed through the backstage area. Tony's silence spoke louder than any words could have. The color drained from his face as tears began streaming down his cheeks. "Grace, I'm so sorry. The fire department, they did everything they could. The smoke inhalation was too severe. Emma, Lily, and Noah, they didn't make it. All 3 of them are gone." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, each one landing with the force of a sledgehammer against Grace's heart. Time stopped completely. The sounds of the bustling backstage area faded into white noise as Grace's world collapsed in on itself like a dying star. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, that's not possible. I just talked to them an hour ago. They were fine. They were perfect. This is a mistake. This has to be a mistake." She began hyperventilating, clawing at her chest as if she could physically remove the pain that was crushing her from the inside. The same woman who had just finished singing about God's faithfulness through storms was now experiencing a hurricane that threatened to destroy not just her life, but her very soul. As Tony held her while she collapsed in agonizing sobs, Grace couldn't help but think about the cruel irony. While she had been on stage proclaiming God's goodness to thousands of people, he had allowed her 3 innocent babies to die in the most horrible way imaginable. How could she ever sing about his faithfulness again when he had failed her so completely in her moment of greatest need? The joint funeral service for Emma, Lily, and Noah Thompson was held at Riverside Community Church, the same sanctuary where Grace had led worship for over 8 years, and where her children had learned to sing "Jesus Loves Me" in Sunday school. 3 small white caskets lined the front of the church, each one decorated with the flowers that represented their unique personalities. Sunflowers for Emma, who always chased the light. pink roses for Lily, who loved everything beautiful, and baby's breath for Noah, who had just begun to discover the world. Over 2,000 people packed the church and spilled onto the surrounding streets, including Christian music royalty, devastated fans, and community members whose lives had been touched by Grace's ministry. The worship team that usually supported Grace's powerful voice now sang without her, their harmonies feeling hollow and incomplete. Pastor Michael Stevens, who had baptized all 3 children, struggled through his message about God's mysterious ways, while Grace sat in the front row like a living statue, her eyes vacant and her spirit completely shattered. "Grace has asked me to read a statement on her behalf," Pastor Stevens announced with a trembling voice. "She wants you all to know how grateful she is for your love and prayers during this unimaginable time." But as he unfolded the paper, Grace suddenly stood up with robotic movements and walked to the microphone. The entire congregation held its breath, hoping to hear words of faith from their beloved worship leader. "You want to know what I have to say?" Grace's voice was barely a whisper, but the microphone picked up every word. "I have nothing. No words of comfort, no songs of praise, no testimony of God's goodness." Her voice grew stronger and more bitter with each sentence. "While I was singing about his faithfulness, he let my babies burn to death. While I was proclaiming his love, he was silent when they needed him most." Gasps echoed throughout the sanctuary as Grace continued her devastating confession. "I stood on stages around the world telling people that God would never leave them or forsake them. I was a liar. I told countless mothers that God had a perfect plan for their children. I was wrong. There is no plan. There is no purpose. There is no God who cares about innocent children dying in agony." The congregation sat in stunned silence as their spiritual leader completely deconstructed her faith in real time. "So don't expect me to sing about his goodness ever again. Don't expect me to comfort you with lies about his perfect timing. And don't expect me to pretend that any of this makes sense in God's grand design." With those final words, Grace walked away from the microphone, past the 3 caskets holding her entire world, and out of the church forever. As she drove away from the cemetery after the burial, leaving behind not just her children, but her career, her faith, and her identity, she couldn't help but wonder, if God had truly forsaken her, what reason did she have left to keep living? 6 months after the funeral, Grace's once beautiful home on Maple Street had become a mausoleum of memories and neglect. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, mail overflowed onto the floor, and the children's rooms remained exactly as they had left them that tragic October evening. Grace moved through the house like a ghost, surviving on whiskey and sleeping pills, having lost 40 pounds from her already slender frame. The woman who once glowed with divine purpose now looked like a walking corpse, her famous golden hair unwashed and hanging limp around her hollow cheekbones. The music industry had tried to reach out with genuine concern and offers of support, but Grace had disappeared completely from public life. Her record label executives called daily. Her manager Tony visited weekly, bringing groceries she wouldn't eat, and Pastor Stevens left voicemails filled with prayers she refused to hear. "Grace, please open the door. We're worried about you," Tony would plead through the locked front door, but she would simply turn up the volume on the television to drown out his voice. The home studio where she had once poured her heart into songs of worship had been completely destroyed in her rage. Gold records lay shattered on the floor, awards were thrown into boxes and hidden in closets, and her beloved piano, the same one where she had taught Emma and Lily to play Amazing Grace, now sat covered with a sheet-like furniture in a haunted house. Grace couldn't bear to hear a single note of music, as every melody reminded her of lullabies she would never sing again. "God, if you're real, if you're listening, I hate you," she would scream into the empty house during her darkest moments. "You took everything from me. You gave me a voice to praise you, and you used it to distract me while my babies died." Her neighbors had grown accustomed to hearing her anguished cries through the thin walls, some calling the police for wellness checks that she refused to answer. The breaking point came on a cold, February evening when Grace discovered Emma's diary hidden under her bed. In a child's careful handwriting, Emma had written, "Dear God, thank you for making Mommy sing so pretty. When she sings, I feel like angels are dancing in my heart. I hope when I grow up, I can sing for you too and make people feel happy like Mommy does." Grace dropped the diary as if it were on fire, her hands shaking uncontrollably. That night, Grace sat in her car in the garage with the engine running, carbon monoxide slowly filling the enclosed space as she waited for the pain to finally end. "I'm coming, babies," she whispered, closing her eyes and thinking about joining Emma, Lily, and Noah wherever they were. "Mommy's sorry she wasn't there to save you. Mommy's coming now." As consciousness began to fade, and she felt herself slipping away toward what she hoped would be peaceful oblivion, Grace had no idea that she was about to experience an encounter that would change everything. But was she already too far gone to be reached, even by the God she now claimed to hate with every fiber of her broken being? As Grace slipped toward unconsciousness in the carbon monoxide-filled garage, her phone suddenly rang with an unknown number, piercing through the deadly silence. The sound was so unexpected and jarring that it startled her awake just enough to fumble for the phone with trembling fingers. "Hello?" she answered weakly, her voice barely audible through the toxic haze that was supposed to end her suffering forever. "Grace Williams Thompson?" The voice on the other end was that of a young girl, maybe 8 years old, speaking with the clarity and confidence that seemed almost supernatural. "My name is Sophia Martinez, and God told me to call you right now. He said you're in danger and that you need to hear something very important before you make a decision you can't take back." Grace's blood ran cold, despite the carbon monoxide poisoning, because she had never given her personal phone number to any children or their families. "How did you get this number? Who are you?" Grace whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for the garage door opener, though she didn't understand why. Little Sophia continued with an urgency that cut through Grace's confusion. "God showed me your babies in a vision, Grace. Emma, Lily, and Noah are singing the most beautiful songs in heaven, and they're not sad. They're waiting for you, but not yet. Not like this." "That's impossible," Grace sobbed. But she found herself pressing the garage door button, letting fresh air flood into the poisonous space. "God doesn't care about me. He let them die while I was singing his praises. He's cruel and heartless." But even as she spoke these words of bitterness, something deep within her spirit was stirring, as if responding to the child's voice with recognition rather than skepticism. Sophia's voice became even more insistent. "Grace, your babies want you to know that they heard every song you ever sang to them, and those songs are still playing in heaven. Emma told me to tell you that the angels really do dance when you sing, just like she wrote in her diary. Lily wants you to know that heaven is more beautiful than all the pretty things she loved on earth. And little Noah is talking now, and his first word in heaven was, 'Mama.'" Grace stumbled out of the car and collapsed on the garage floor, gasping for clean air while tears streamed down her face. "How do you know about Emma's diary? How do you know any of this?" she demanded. But Sophia simply continued, "They're not gone forever, Grace. They're just waiting for you in a place where there's no more fire, no more fear, no more pain. But God has work for you to do first. Other mamas need to hear what you're going to learn about his love being stronger than death." The call ended as mysteriously as it had begun, leaving Grace alone on the cold garage floor with her heart pounding and her mind reeling from what had just transpired. As she sat there breathing deeply and feeling sensation return to her numb limbs, she realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about ending her life. Instead, she was thinking about the impossible. What if God hadn't abandoned her after all? What if this was all part of a story much bigger than her understanding? But how could she ever trust him again after he had allowed such unspeakable tragedy to destroy everything she loved? That night, Grace couldn't sleep despite taking double her usual dose of sleeping pills. The mysterious phone call from little Sophia replayed in her mind like a broken record, and she found herself pacing through her house, stopping at each of her children's bedroom doors that she hadn't opened since the funeral. "If If you're really there, she whispered toward the ceiling, if you really do have some purpose in all this hell you've put me through, then you're going to have to prove it, because I have nothing left to believe in. At exactly 3:33 a.m., Grace was startled awake from a restless sleep by the sound of children singing. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but unfamiliar, with harmonies that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, wondering if her grief had finally driven her completely insane. But the singing grew louder and more distinct, and she realized with shock that she recognized two of the voices. Emma and Lily were singing together in perfect harmony. Grace stumbled out of bed and followed the ethereal music downstairs to the living room, where an impossible sight awaited her. The room was filled with a warm, golden light that had no earthly source, and in the center of this divine radiance stood her three children. But they weren't the broken, burnt bodies she had seen in the morgue. Emma and Lily, now appearing to be about 10 years old, wore flowing white robes and had faces that literally glowed with joy and peace. Little Noah, looking like a 4-year-old, toddled between his sisters with perfect speech and movements. "Mommy," Noah called out with delight, his voice clear as crystal bells. "We've been waiting for you to see us. We're not hurt anymore. We're not scared anymore. And we're not gone. We're just in the most wonderful place." Emma stepped forward with the mature wisdom that seemed to characterize children in heaven. "Mama, we heard you crying every night, and it makes us sad because you think God took us away from you. But He didn't take us. He received us." Lily, always the artistic one, began to describe heaven with the wonder of a child and the vocabulary of a poet. "Mommy, there are colors here that don't exist on earth, and music that makes your soul dance even when you're standing still. And Jesus, Mama, Jesus holds us every day and tells us stories about you when you were little, and how proud He is of your heart, even when it's broken." "But why?" Grace sobbed, reaching toward them but finding she couldn't touch them. "Why did you have to leave me? Why did God let you die in such a horrible way when I was singing about His goodness?" Emma's response cut straight to the heart of Grace's deepest wound. "Because, Mama, some people can only learn to trust God's love through the valley of death, and some people need to hear about hope from someone who has walked through hell and found heaven on the other side." Noah clapped his little hands with excitement. "Mama, you're going to sing again. But not the same songs. You're going to sing songs that heal broken mamas and papas who lost their babies like you lost us. And every time you sing, we'll be singing with you from heaven." As the vision began to fade, Emma called out one final message that would haunt Grace forever. "Mama, your voice was never meant to just praise God when life is easy. It was meant to prove that His love is stronger than death itself. Will you trust Him enough to sing again?" Grace woke up on the living room floor as dawn light filtered through the windows, unsure if what she had experienced was a divine vision or a grief-induced hallucination. But something fundamental had shifted inside her broken heart during the night. For the first time in 8 months, she felt a flicker of something that might eventually grow into hope. The crushing weight of despair that had pressed down on her chest like a boulder was still there, but now it felt more like a heavy blanket that could potentially be lifted rather than a coffin lid that would never open. She walked slowly to her destroyed music studio and pulled the sheet off her piano with trembling hands. The keys were dusty and some were slightly out of tune from months of neglect, but when she pressed middle C, the note rang out clear and true. Grace placed both hands on the keyboard and began to play a simple melody that came from somewhere deep within her soul, not from memory or training, but from a well of pain that was somehow transforming into something else entirely. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she whispered toward heaven as her fingers found their way across the familiar keys. "I don't know if I'll ever understand why you allowed such horrible suffering. But my babies want me to sing again. And if there's even a chance that you can use my broken voice to help other broken hearts, then maybe I can try." Her voice was hoarse from months of screaming and silence, cracking on every note, but she began to hum a wordless melody that seemed to carry all her grief and newfound hope. The first song that emerged from Grace's resurrected voice was nothing like the polished, inspirational anthems she had been known for. This was raw, honest, and born from the deepest valley of human experience. She called it "When Heaven Feels Silent," and the lyrics came pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. When heaven feels silent and hope feels like lies, when prayers feel like whispers that die in the skies, I'll trust in the darkness what I learned in the light, that love never ends, even in the endless night. Over the following weeks, Grace began the slow process of rebuilding her relationship with God, but it looked nothing like her previous faith. This new faith was forged in fire, tempered by loss, and marked by questions that demanded honest answers rather than easy platitudes. She started attending a grief support group at a different church, where she sat in silence for weeks before finally sharing her story with other parents who had buried children. "I used to think faith meant having all the answers," Grace told the group one evening, her voice still fragile but growing stronger. "I used to sing about God's perfect plan as if I understood it. Now I know that sometimes faith means singing in the dark, trusting that dawn will come even when you can't see any light." Her words resonated deeply with parents who had been given empty religious cliches about their losses, but who had never heard someone speak honestly about the struggle to believe when God feels absent. Dr. Sarah Chen, the grief counselor who led the group, approached Grace after one particularly powerful sharing session. "Grace, I've been working with grieving parents for 15 years, and I've never heard anyone articulate the journey from despair to hope so beautifully. Have you considered that your story might be exactly what other parents need to hear?" As Grace drove home that night, she found herself wondering, was she ready to step back into the public eye, not as the polished Christian celebrity she had been, but as a wounded healer who could offer authentic hope to those walking through their own valleys of death? 1 year after the devastating fire, Grace stood backstage at a small community center in Memphis, Tennessee, preparing to perform publicly. For the first time since that tragic night at the Grand Ole Opry, this wasn't the glamorous venue she was accustomed to, just a modest auditorium that held 300 people, filled entirely with parents who had lost children. The audience included mothers who had buried babies, fathers who had lost teenagers in accidents, and families whose children had died from cancer, suicide, and countless other heartbreaking circumstances. "I'm terrified," Grace confessed to Dr. Chen, who had helped organize this special concert through her grief counseling network. "What if I break down on stage? What if my voice cracks? What if I say the wrong thing and hurt someone instead of helping them?" Her hands shook as she adjusted the simple black dress she wore. No sequins, no glamour, just a woman who had walked through hell and somehow found her way back to the light. Dr. Chen placed a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder. "Grace, these people aren't here for a perfect performance. They're here because you've been where they are, you've felt what they feel, and you've found a way to keep breathing when breathing feels impossible. That's the only qualification you need." As Grace walked onto the simple stage with just her keyboard and a single microphone, the audience fell into reverent silence. "My name is Grace Thompson," she began, her voice noticeably different from the confident performer she had once been. "A year ago, I lost my 3 children, Emma, Lily, and Noah, in a house fire while I was on stage, singing about God's faithfulness. For months, I hated God, I hated myself, and I wanted to die. I'm not here tonight to tell you that everything happens for a reason, because I don't believe that's true. I'm here because my children visited me from heaven and asked me to use my broken voice to help other broken hearts find a reason to keep singing." She began to play "When Heaven Feels Silent," the song born from her deepest despair, and by the second verse, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Parents who had been carrying their grief in isolation for years suddenly felt understood by someone who spoke their language of loss. I don't have answers, Grace continued between songs. I don't know why God allows children to die. But I know that love is stronger than death, hope is stronger than despair. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to let darkness have the final word. Margaret Wilson, a mother who had lost her 16-year-old son to suicide 6 months earlier, stood up during Grace's final song and began to sing along. Her voice was broken and off-key, but it was the first time she had sung since her son's death. One by one, other parents joined in, creating a chorus of wounded voices that somehow harmonized into something beautiful and redemptive. After the concert, dozens of parents surrounded Grace, not asking for autographs or selfies, but sharing their stories and thanking her for giving voice to their unspoken pain. "You made me feel less alone," whispered James Carter, whose 8-year-old daughter had died from leukemia. "You made me believe I might survive this," added Linda Rodriguez, who had lost twin boys in a car accident. As Grace drove home that night, she realized that her children had been right. Her voice had been resurrected not to return to her old life, but to serve a purpose she never could have imagined. But was she ready to take this ministry of healing to an even larger audience that desperately needed to hear her message of hope beyond tragedy? 2 years after her children's death, Grace Williams Thompson stood on the stage of Madison Square Garden, but this time it wasn't for personal glory or career advancement. She had founded Voices of Hope Ministry, and tonight's concert was a benefit for families who had lost children, featuring not just Grace, but dozens of other parents who had found their voices again after unimaginable loss. The venue was packed with 20,000 people, many of them parents carrying photos of their deceased children, all united by grief transformed into purpose. 3 years ago, I thought my story ended when my children died, Grace spoke into the microphone, her voice now strong and clear, tempered by suffering but refined by hope. I thought God had abandoned me, that faith was a lie, and that love was powerless against death. But Emma, Lily, and Noah taught me from heaven that our stories don't end with tragedy. They begin with how we choose to respond to it. The massive crowd hung on every word, recognizing authentic authority that could only come from someone who had walked through the fire and emerged transformed. Behind Grace on the stage hung a beautiful banner with photos of hundreds of children who had died too soon, sent in by families from around the world who had been touched by her ministry. Each of these precious faces represents a family that was shattered by loss, Grace continued, gesturing toward the memorial display. But each one also represents the truth that love never dies, hope can be reborn, and God can use our deepest wounds to become wells of healing for others. The highlight of the evening came when Grace invited 12 other parents to join her on stage, each one representing a different type of loss, from cancer to suicide to accidents to violence. Together, they sang a new song Grace had written called Love Never Ends, with each parent taking a verse that told their unique story of grief and redemption. The harmony of their voices, all broken but rebuilt, created a sound that seemed to come directly from heaven itself. As the concert reached its climax, something extraordinary happened. Throughout the arena, people began holding up their phones with flashlight apps activated, creating a sea of lights that represented each life touched by loss, but choosing to shine anyway. "This is what resurrection looks like," Grace declared through tears of joy. "Not the absence of death, but the presence of love that refuses to be extinguished by darkness." In the months that followed, Voices of Hope Ministry expanded internationally, with support groups in 15 countries and an online platform that connected grieving parents across the globe. Grace's new album, Songs from the Valley, topped the Christian charts not because of its production value, but because of its raw honesty about faith in the face of tragedy. Critics called it the most important Christian album of the decade because it offered hope without minimizing pain. The ministry had saved countless lives, with over 500 parents crediting Grace's story with preventing their suicides during their darkest moments. Grace received thousands of letters from parents who had found the strength to keep living after hearing her testimony. "You showed me that it's possible to love God and be angry at Him at the same time," wrote one mother. "You taught me that faith isn't about having answers, it's about having hope." Mom. On the third anniversary of Emma, Lily, and Noah's death, Grace returned to Nashville and held a special memorial service at the cemetery where her children were buried. But this time, she wasn't alone in her grief. Over 1,000 people joined her: parents from her support groups, families who had been helped by the ministry, and countless others whose lives had been touched by her story of hope rising from ashes. As Grace stood by her children's graves that day, surrounded by a community of love that had grown from her deepest loss, she remembered the words from Psalm 30:11 that had become the foundation of her resurrected faith. "You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy." God hadn't prevented her children's death, but He had transformed her mourning into a ministry that brought life to thousands of other grieving hearts. Emma, Lily, and Noah's voices had joined the eternal chorus of heaven, but their mother's voice had become a bridge between earth and eternity, proving that love truly is stronger than death. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more true testimonies of hope triumphing over tragedy. Hit the bell notification so you never miss a story that could change your life. Share this video with someone who needs to know that their story isn't over, no matter how dark it seems. Comment below. Have you experienced loss that shook your faith? How did you find hope again? Your story could inspire someone else who's walking through their darkest valley. Remember, God can turn your deepest pain into your greatest purpose. Your voice matters, and your story isn't finished yet. God bless you.